Okay, hello, welcome to the first in a series of revision videos updated for 2021 on the key topic of economic development. In this video, we're going to think a little bit about the meaning of development and then what do we actually mean by this broad term. Development is a broad rather than a narrow concept and means hopefully a sustained improvement in the quality of life and living standards, which show through measures of things like income per capita, literacy, life expectancy and other healthcare outcomes. Economic development is fundamentally about the development of people over time. Even in 2020, just under 1/10 of the world's growing population still live on an income below $1.90 per day, adjusted for purchasing power parity. So cutting extreme poverty is fundamental to making sustained progress in development. The great Professor Amartya Sen has adopted a capabilities approach which recognises development as a process, hopefully a continuous process, although there'll be ups and downs, of expanding an individual's freedom. Amartya Sen pursues the idea that human development provides an opportunity for people to free themselves from the persistent and deep suffering caused by premature mortality, persecution and intolerance, starvation, malnutrition, malnourishment and illiteracy. He has the concept of inclusive development at the heart of his work, and that's about improving and deepening people's freedoms and capabilities. Professor Joe Stiglitz says that development is about transforming the lives of people, not just transforming economies. And these definitions remind us that development must consider a wider range of statistics than merely just GDP or GNI per capita. Development is concerned with how people are actually affected. It looks at their actual living standards and the freedoms they have to live in the absence of extreme poverty and suffering. One of the measures that we use, it's flawed in a few ways, but it's a key measure, is the Human Development Index. And that's calculated as a broad composite measure of 3 indicators of improvements in people's lives. HDI is calculated through a geometric mean of per capita incomes, life expectancy at birth, and the average between the mean years of schooling and expected years of schooling. So, for example, if we look at sub-Saharan Africa, infrastructure and education systems are generally underdeveloped and of poor quality, and that has an impact directly on both health and education outcomes as well as per capita incomes. The 3 parts of the HDI are, first of all, knowledge, mean and actual years of schooling, expected years of schooling, long and healthy life, life expectancy component is included, and also income thresholds. The data uses GNI per capita, income per head of population adjusted for a purchasing power standard. Let's take a look at some HDI data, the latest figures published in December 2020 for a selection of countries. Here's a cluster of countries which are scoring very highly in the very high development section of the HDI. So, for example, Norway is top and Ireland comes second. The UK comes 13. And you can see the data there. High expected years of schooling, high mean years of schooling. And of course, these are rich countries with a high per capita income. And then perhaps let's contrast with another group of countries lower down on the HDI rankings. Mexico, Brazil and China are in similar positions. Those are middle income countries with a per capita income of just less than $20,000 per head. And then as we get down further, we see countries like Vietnam and India. India actually dropped 2 places in the latest rankings, still 130th on HDI, even though it's one of the biggest economies in the world. And then Niger, which in 2020 came bottom of HDI, per capita income just above $1,200 per year, but extremely low scores on education components. These are the highest ranked countries in HDI. These are essentially the top 10 countries, and it's a familiar catalogue of countries which are rich, high income, with very well developed healthcare and education systems. And these are the lowest ranked HDI countries in 2020, countries with very low per capita incomes in the case of the CAR, and Burundi less than $1,000 per year. And you can see also in the penultimate right hand column there, the mean years of schooling are extremely low, even compared to expected years of schooling. Life expectancy in these countries has increased in some cases, but remains lower than many countries still below 60. What's interesting, if looking at the HDI in a little bit more detail, is a number of countries that actually perform their income per capita levels. Here's an example, Cuba. So Cuba was ranked 70th on HDI in 2020, but its per capita income would have put it at 115 in 2020. You can see its per capita income there is less than $9,000. So in fact on HDI it's 45 places better than its GNI per capita ranking would imply. And part of the answer there is that Cuba has always invested heavily in education and healthcare. It has a very high life expectancy, much higher than other countries with a similar per capita income, and a very well developed and high quality schooling system built into it. And that's one of the main reasons why Cuba is now a top 70 country, ahead of China and ahead of Brazil, for example, on HDI. Here's another group of countries who all outperform. In other words, their HDI position is better than if we looked solely at GNI per capita. On the other hand, there are countries whose HDI performance lags well below their GNI per capita. One of the extreme examples, perhaps the biggest, is Equatorial Guinea, which was ranked 145 on HDI, some 57 places worse than if you look at per capita income. Can you see here, for example, that their gross national income is just under $14,000 per capita in real terms, yet their life expectancy is below 60, and mean years of schooling is below 6 years. And these are other countries whose GNI per capita rank minus the HDI rank is negative, meaning that their income per capita in theory should give them a strong advantage on HDI, but their rankings underperform. Qatar is a great example. It is indeed the second richest country in the world, yet appears only 45th on HDI. Botswana has lifted its per capita income to over $16,000 per year, but is 100th on HDI. If we then look at the HDI by development group instead of looking at individual countries, this picture emerges. So these are the figures for very high human development countries, including the UK, Norway, Ireland and Germany. These are for high development countries, medium development countries, low human development. And then we can make a special look at developing countries. Classifications change over time, of course, and sub-Saharan Africa. And notice here that per capita incomes in sub-Saharan Africa, despite one or two success stories, remain only a third of as the figure for developing countries as a whole. The HDI is a useful figure to contribute to our understanding of development, because it does give us 3 or 4 key indicators, key metrics, which tell us something about the progress that countries are making. However, it's important to be aware of some of the limitations of the HDI. The original HDI made no adjustment for gender inequality, we'll come to that in a second, or income and wealth inequality, although they do now publish data taking those two factors into account. HDI might tell us something about per capita incomes rising and healthy life expectancy, but less so about political and economic freedoms, including tolerance of minority views. Increasingly, sustainable development tries to capture a much broader range of objectives. There are indeed 17 separate sustainable development goals, and we cover that in a separate video. The number of years in schooling is important, but so too is the quality of education, including the quality of access to education and the quality of teaching. And whilst life expectancy in years is an important metric, we also start to think a little bit about years of healthy life expectancy. That's the number of years you can expect to live before one or more chronic illnesses take hold. Gender inequality is now an important issue throughout the world, as we know, and there are quite a few bits of data in the latest HDI report which give us some information about the scale of gender inequality. Here we organise by group, and some of the indicators we use are maternal mortality, the adolescent birth rate, a political indicator, the share of seats in Parliament held by women, and then some education and labour market participation data, including the population with at least some secondary education. And you can see that in the low human development context here, we have a high maternal mortality rate, a very high adolescent birth rate, and a figure of less than 20%, less than 1 female in 5, has had access to at least some secondary education. Sub-Saharan African figures are consistent with that of low human development, and obviously a stark contrast with other countries. These are the countries in the world, I think, with the highest mean years of schooling, and you can see the gaps there as we move down the scale. And these are countries which, again, some data on gender inequality for some of the lowest ranking countries in the world. This table actually ranks countries with the highest maternal mortality. So in South Sudan, there were over 1,100 deaths per 100,000 live births, a staggeringly high figure. And here's some data from the World in Data database, a fantastic resource. I'll post a link in the comment section of the video. If all countries in the world have the same maternal mortality rate of the places with the best healthcare, something like 300,000 fewer women would die each year. And many of these deaths are preventable, especially if you have basic healthcare facilities available for mothers. But staggering differences in maternal mortality expressed here against GDP per capita. These are the countries with the lowest maternal mortality rates in the world: Italy, Poland and Belarus and Norway. The UK has a maternal mortality rate of 7 deaths per 100,000 live births. What are we showing here? This chart shows again the gaps between countries in terms of female mean years of schooling and male years of schooling, and the gaps between countries right at the top and right at the bottom of the HDI database. So we've looked a little bit in this video at how we define and how we measure economic development, and we'll develop these themes in the next video, looking at the difference between economic growth and development.